For 40 years, while the world slept peacefully, Kathryn Kuhlman stayed awake at 2 a.m. every single night, not because she had insomnia, not because she was restless, but because something or someone was calling her, what was so powerful, so sacred, that she gave up decades of sleep for it. By the end of this, you'll understand why she never missed that hour, and why maybe you shouldn't either. Most people saw Kathryn Kuhlman as the woman in the flowing dress, standing on stages, calling out healings, and speaking with a tenderness that moved hearts. But what they didn't see, what few even knew, was the life she lived behind the curtain when the lights were off, the world was asleep, and it was just her in silence. It was in those hidden hours, most often around 2 a.m., that something sacred happened. Not once, not occasionally, but night after night for decades. She didn't talk about it much, not in the way people expected. She didn't boast about her sleepless nights or use them to build her image. To her, those 2 a.m. moments weren't for public display. They were holy, they were private, and they were powerful. While others slept, she was awake, not because she couldn't rest, but because her spirit wouldn't allow her to ignore the pull. There was something about that hour that felt like an invitation, a gentle tug, a whisper that stirred her from sleep, and she never wanted to miss it. People often think spiritual power comes from big actions, big platforms, and bold voices. But Kathryn's life showed something different. Her strength came from the quiet places, from the hidden decisions, from the moments when no one was watching. And for her, 2 a.m. became the most sacred time of all. It was the hour when everything was stripped away. No meetings, no stage, no distractions. Just stillness, and in that stillness something shifted. She often said she didn't fully understand why 2 a.m. was so heavy, so filled with weight, but she knew it wasn't ordinary. The air felt different, her heart became more sensitive, her mind quieted, and the noise of the day faded into the background. It was there in that silence that she poured out her heart, sometimes with words, sometimes with tears, sometimes with nothing but quiet surrender. There's a kind of honesty that only shows up in the middle of the night. You can't hide from yourself when everything around you is silent. Kathryn embraced that vulnerability. She didn't try to escape it. She welcomed it because she believed that's where the real transformation happened. Not when everything was going well, not when applause filled the room, but when it was just her, the shadows of the night, and the invisible presence that never left her side. People didn't see the moments when she knelt on the floor at 2 a.m., praying not for herself, but for people she'd never meet. They didn't see the nights she stayed up in pain, crying for the broken, the sick, the lonely. She carried a burden few understood, and instead of running from it, she allowed herself to be broken by it. That was her secret. That was where the power came from. The world saw miracles, but those miracles had roots. And those roots went deep into the soil of the unseen. She once said she would rather lose sleep than miss the voice that often came in whispers. She wasn't afraid of the dark. In fact, she found light in it. There was something about 2 a.m. that stripped everything else away. No titles, no audience, no obligations. Just the raw, unfiltered truth of where she stood, and who she stood with. And because she made room in the night, she carried something into the day that no one else could manufacture. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about religion. It was about relationship, about being willing to show up when no one else would, about choosing devotion when comfort called. While others turned over in their beds, she turned her face towards something greater, believing that if she showed up in the dark, light would follow. You can't fake that kind of consistency. You can't sustain it unless there's something real holding you. For 40 years, Kathryn responded to the same call, and the truth is that call still exists. It hasn't stopped ringing. It still reaches out in the early hours, searching for someone who will say yes. Not just once, but again and again. What made her different wasn't her talent or her fame. It was her willingness to answer that call, even when it cost her sleep, even when it meant crying alone in the night, even when no one else would ever know. She understood something the world often forgets. The most important moments are often the ones no one sees, and that's where everything begins. Kathryn Kuhlman didn't lose sleep for attention. She didn't stay awake at 2 a.m. because she was restless or battling insomnia. She did it because something deep within her soul responded to a presence that called her higher. For 40 years she woke up in those sacred, silent hours, not to be seen, not to be heard, but simply to be available. While the world dreamed behind closed eyes, she was awake, weeping, whispering, or simply sitting in silence. To her, 2 a.m. wasn't just a time. It was a meeting place. There was no alarm clock, no schedule. It wasn't planned. It was spiritual. She didn't wake up out of habit. She woke up out of hunger, a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by applause or success. It was a pull that came without warning, a weight that gently pressed on her spirit until she had no choice but to rise. And when she did, the room became sacred ground. This was where she found her strength, not on stage, not in the spotlight, but in the quiet rooms where only one voice mattered. That voice didn't shout. It didn't demand, it whispered, and Kathryn was one of the few who truly listened. She believed that if she didn't answer that whisper, something would be lost, not just for her, but for someone else waiting on the other side of her obedience. Night after night, year after year, she returned to the same posture, the same silence, the same invisible altar, because she believed that what happened in the dark would one day shift what happened in the light. It wasn't emotion, it was discipline, it was love. She wasn't chasing a feeling, she was honoring a presence. Some people wonder why their lives feel dry or disconnected. They pray during the day, speak words out loud, attend gatherings, but something still feels missing. Kathryn understood why. She knew there were some things that couldn't be received in public moments. They had to be caught in private ones, and those private moments usually came when the body was tired, but the spirit refused to settle. She never asked for credit. She didn't share these midnight stories as badges of honor. She carried them quietly like precious treasures because they weren't for show. They were personal and sacred. Those hours gave her a sensitivity most people never experience, a kind of stillness that allowed her to discern things others missed. She would often walk into a room and know exactly what was needed, not because someone told her, but because she had already been prepared. In the night, 40 years of showing up, 40 years of interrupted sleep, 40 years of laying down comfort for connection. That's not a routine, that's a calling, and it's one most people would ignore. But Kathryn didn't. She knew the cost. She paid it anyway, and the results spoke for themselves. Not just in the miracles, but in the gentleness of her spirit, the authority in her words, and the atmosphere that followed her wherever she went. If you've ever felt that pull in the night, that strange awareness that you're being nudged awake, it might not be a coincidence. It might be the same whisper Kathryn heard, a quiet invitation to rise while the world sleeps and step into a moment that carries more power than you can imagine. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be present. There's a kind of battle that doesn't start with noise. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with fire or flashing lights. It comes quietly through a thought, a weight on the chest, a sudden heaviness in the air, and more often than not it shows up around 2 a.m. Kathryn Kuhlman understood this better than most. She knew that the night carried things the day couldn't. She believed the silence was never empty. It was filled with movement, filled with resistance, and filled with divine presence. People often ask, why couldn't she just pray during the day? The answer is simple. Some things are only revealed in the dark. There are layers of spiritual awareness that can only be accessed when everything else is still, and 2 a.m. offered that stillness. That's when the noise of the world quieted down, when the mind softened, when the heart finally had space to speak honestly. And Kathryn made room for that space. Not once or twice, but for decades. She didn't just wake up to pray. She woke up to fight. Not the kind of fight you see, but the kind you feel. She fought for clarity when confusion tried to slip in. She fought for peace when anxiety tried to crawl into the corners of the soul. She fought for healing, not just for herself, but for the countless people she carried in her heart. She didn't need to see their faces. She didn't need to know their names. She just knew something was happening in the spirit, and she was being asked to step into it. These weren't long, dramatic battles. Sometimes it was just her sitting in silence, listening. Other times it was tears or a few soft words spoken into the darkness. She never approached it with fear. She approached it with reverence. She understood what most people miss. 2 a.m. isn't just a random hour. It's a doorway, and either you sleep through it or you step into it. Kathryn stepped into it again and again, even when she was exhausted, even when she had no words left, even when she felt like nothing was changing. She didn't need results to be consistent. Her faithfulness wasn't tied to feelings. It was tied to love, and that love showed up every night, no matter how inconvenient, no matter how costly. The reason most people never walk in that kind of depth is because they're waiting for motivation. But Kathryn wasn't waiting to feel inspired. She was answering something bigger than herself, something eternal, something sacred, and what she found at 2 a.m. shaped every other part of her life. She could walk into a room and carry peace without speaking. She could discern what was happening in someone's heart without asking. She could stand in front of a crowd and speak words that pierced through layers of pain, because she had already done the work in secret, in silence, in surrender. That's the kind of power you can't manufacture. It's not found in public places. It's cultivated in private ones, and Kathryn knew that. She never tried to rush through the night. She lingered in it, because she knew something most people don't. The war at 2 a.m. is where destinies shift, and the ones who are awake during that time are the ones holding the line.